Thank you for joining us on this April Fool's Day for the third session of our virtual series on tackling learning gaps. This one is focused on re-engaging learners. And before we get started here with the content, I have a couple of housekeeping things. We like to start our virtual meetings with a couple of meeting protocols. Please do join by video, and we encourage you to add your full name on your title and your state if you want to do that as well. To do that, you just hover over your tile and 3 dots will show up, and then you'll have the option to rename. We hope you'll be ready to contribute to the conversation by sharing your state's approach or perspective, but please do mute your audio when you're not speaking. Feel free to type your questions or your comments into the chat box at any time. We do have those settings open so that the speakers can share their screens. So be careful not to share your screen, please. And just a heads up that this meeting is being recorded, and that's with the exception of the Q&A portion that will be edited out. We are building our virtual library, and we'll be posting the recording online, as well as the other pieces of this series if you missed those earlier in this week. So just to recap what we've talked about this week, earlier this week we talked about assessing learning gaps. And then yesterday we heard about the impact of disrupted learning. And today we're going to be talking about re-engaging learners with a focus on re-engaging through after school and summer learning programs. Just a quick overview of today's agenda. First, I have my colleague, Autumn Rivera. She's here in Denver, and she's going to be giving an overview of some of the state legislation that we're seeing aimed at addressing unfinished learning. We have Austin Reed, who's in our DC office. He's going to be giving an overview of the most recent federal relief legislation, the American Rescue Plan, as it relates to our conversation today. And we have our 2 outside speakers. We have Jamie Singer. She's Principal TA Consultant with the American Institutes for Research, AIR. And then we have Aaron Jorkin. He's the Chief Executive Officer with the National Summer Learning Association. We'll have some time for Q&A with our speakers, but as I mentioned, feel free to type those questions as you think of them in the chat box, and we will get to them at that time. Next slide, please. And I am going to turn it over to Autumn.
Good morning, / good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Ashley. So like she said, I'm Autumn Rivera, and I'm going to give an overview of what we're seeing for state legislation for re-engaging learners. Starting off, one of the trends we've seen is appropriating funds to assist in learning acceleration. If Alaska House Bill 67 passes, it'll make special appropriations from the general fund for K-12 public schools to support student recovery from academic losses as a result of COVID-19. We've also seen the trend of legislation directing the SEA's approach. Hawaii is currently considering House Bill 11, which urges the Board of Education and SEAs to support and implement after-school programs to combat learning loss. Grant programs is another approach we're seeing. Minnesota House Bill 4 and Senate Bill 64, if passed, appropriates money for grants to expand existing after-school and summer programs. This grant program would be administered by the After School Network 2 programs. Programs are given preference on a bunch of different things. For example, serving communities of colors, programs that have staff members that reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of students served, and programs that have staff members, programs serving kids on hybrid or remote learning, and so on. It also favors expanding school community partnerships. Additionally, programs receiving these funds must provide social and emotional learning supports for students. Next, we've seen pending legislation requiring recovery plans. For example, Rhode Island House Bill 5834 would direct all school districts to prepare district recovery plans, which would include strategies and targets for students to address losses in student academic as well as social emotional learning. If North Carolina House Bill 82 passes, it will establish school extension, learning, recovery, and enrichment programs in each local school administrative unit to mitigate the impacts of COVID on at-risk students, and to require the implementation and innovative benchmark assessments. Another trend we've seen from states is literacy assistance in summer and after-school programs. So Nevada Assembly Bill 3 passed last year, and this provides additional funding for evidence-based and school-based literacy initiatives for students enrolled in K through third grade. This bill also includes literacy professional development for school personnel who provide summer school programs for students. Move to the next slide. Okay, and I just want to mention Tennessee specifically. Tennessee currently has a multi-pronged approach to address learning loss with 3 enacted bills. They've established a 9-person task force with House Bill 2470. This task force will focus on education recovery and innovation to examine the short and long-term effects that COVID-19 and natural disasters have had on the state's educational systems. The commission will advise and make recommendations based on their findings. They also passed House Bill 7004, or the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act. This requires local education agencies and public charter schools to implement a program of after-school learning mini camps, learning loss bridge camps, and summer learning camps to remediate student learning loss. Additionally, this legislation also requires that the SEA to help develop and implement new benchmarking and assessment system. This will be piloted as the pre and post-test assessment on those camps I mentioned before. The state is also launching a tutoring program, the Tennessee Accelerating Literacy and Learning Corps, which will include statewide initiatives to recruit high-quality tutors, training and ongoing PD development for members, and developing materials for tutoring students. Finally, Tennessee's enacted Senate Bill 7029, which requires the department to direct each local board of education and charter school governing body to develop a plan to conduct mental and behavioral health screenings for all students in kindergarten through 8th grade to evaluate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on students' mental and behavioral health and any resulting learning loss. So those are the ones I've got for you guys. So I think I can go ahead and pass on to my colleague, Austin Reed.
Thanks, Autumn, and good afternoon, everybody. So I think that what was interesting is that there was a lot of conversations that Autumn just described that were happening at the state level about how to recover lost learning at the same time that these stimulus bills were passed. And so, during the month of February, when a lot of these bills were being considered, states were just trying to get a hold of their ESSER 2 allocations. And then, of course, mere weeks later, states received now the ESSER 3 allocation, which is a significant amount of funding from the new American Rescue Plan. So I just want to talk about briefly what's in the rescue plan, but talk about what the role that state legislatures could play in determining how these funds are spent and allocated, as well as some conversations that the Department of Education is having around guidance for these provisions. So in terms of what makes the funding different in the American Rescue Plan is that there's some additional set-asides that weren't there in the ESSER fund from for previous stimulus packages. One, states could reserve 10% of their ESSER funds for statewide activities, but now the set-asides are a little more specific. So in this case, states have to reserve at least 5% of funds to address learning loss, and districts previously had unlimited flexibility over how they spend their funds. Now they have to reserve at least 20% of those funds to address learning loss. And as you can see, I have the bill text up here. There's a such as clause, which lists out some things that schools could do. I think that the sense is that language isn't necessarily, that's a non-exhaustive list. And as I'm sure we'll talk about today, there are many, many different approaches that schools and states will take to addressing learning loss. And so I think we'll see some guidance from the department around this, but I do think that there'll be a pretty wide array of strategies that will be allowable uses of these funds, in addition to the ones that are enumerated in the text. There's also a couple other set-asides. There's a 1% state level set-aside for summer school programs and a 1% state set-aside for after-school programs. And what we've seen so far is that the Department of Education seems to be really intent on focusing on that summer school and after school set aside. They recently launched a summer learning and enrichment collaborative and really focused a lot of their messaging and recent events on building a sense of urgency around using this summer to help students recover both academically, but I think a little more focus on recovering both socially and emotionally from the impacts of this pandemic. And one thing to know with all of the bill text, the law asks that states focus on students' academic, social, and emotional needs, as well as focusing on any student subgroups that have been disproportionately impacted. So that'd be English language learners, students with disabilities, homeless and foster youth, low-income students, the whole gamut. So there is a direction towards equity. So what we're seeing from the department right now is, one, they've launched this summer learning and enrichment collaborative, but they're also supposed to be working on guidance for these funds. We're told that these initial guidance for the use of these funds will come out soon. But I know that one of the big questions and conversations that are being had around the use of these funds is, what does evidence-based programming look like? And I think this has been a kind of an ongoing conversation, especially in the school improvement space since ESSA passed in 2015. Does evidence-based mean a specific program that you could find in What Works Clearinghouse? Does it mean a specific activity? But if you just follow that activity, what parameters do you need to follow? So I think a lot of it at the end of the day is helping schools make good decisions about the activities that they're doing rather than maybe the programs they're using. But we have seen a number of states try to direct schools and districts into picking select programs that they know are really high quality. But I think there's going to be a pretty big conversation between the technical assistance community and states as to how to figure out what capacity we have to put on really quality interventions for students. So that's, I think, what's happening at the Department of Education. We should see something soon. I imagine that it'll maintain a fair amount of flexibility for states, and that's what states are really asking for here. There's a really interesting conversation happening at the state legislative level regarding all of these set-asides, and it's kind of happening in three different levels. And what, again, alluding to something we discussed before, it's interesting that this funding comes on top of conversations that state legislatures were already having about learning loss recovery. So there's these new resources, and so states are, I think, viewing these resources as a way to bolster the plans that they were already putting into place. And so I think you're seeing, in contrast to maybe the first round of ESSER funding last spring, state legislatures really trying to put their signature on these funds, and especially because these funds have to pass through state appropriations processes. So we've seen some conversations around already about the flexible set-aside portion of funds. We've seen a number of states that have been very specific about directing funds in certain ways. I know North Carolina is an example of, they directed their ESSER 2 funds in very specific ways. I think there was some programming that was directed to various state agencies. I think one of them was like the Fish and Wildlife Commission, and it was to carry out summer learning and enrichment programs. So they were thinking about how to collaborate across agencies to provide new types of learning for students. So we've seen some conversations, at least on the flexible state set aside. I think we'll see some conversations about what kind of conditions or guidance states can place within these specific set-asides, the learning loss, the summer school, the after school. So that will be very interesting. Will states say that only certain programs can be accessed? Will they provide a definition for what an after school program is? That will be interesting to see. And then we're also seeing a lot of conversations around the local school agency set aside. So we know the districts have to set aside 20% of funds. There's already a bill moving in Florida that's a little more specific as to what school districts have to do with the funds that they set aside for learning loss. Some things that they're throwing around are defining learning loss as activities that both occur inside and outside of the school day, and use teachers that are already trained in multi-tiered support. So we're really seeing states think about these funds from multiple different lenses, and I think that those conversations will only increase over the next week. So there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of resources, and now we're moving into the conversation about exactly how do we implement this historic amount of education funding. So I will turn it back to you for the rest of our conversation.
Great, thanks so much, Austin. Autumn, if you want to stop sharing, and then Jamie Singer with AI Art is going to be joining us next. Jamie, if you want to go ahead and give you a moment to share your screen.
Sure. Okay.
Great.
Should be able to see my slide now. Yes.
Yep, we see it. So as we talk about re-engaging students and accelerating learning, there's concern, as been mentioned earlier, with not only re-engaging in academic learning, but also social emotional learning. So I'd like to start with some grounding in the science of learning and development. Could you give us an overview of how kids learn?
Yeah, I would love to, and I'm going to distill a lot of information into a short bit of time. So bear with me a little bit on that. And I just also wanted to say quickly, thank you for having me today. And it was great also to hear from Austin and Autumn. Thanks so much for sharing that information. I am Jamie Singer with the American Institutes for Research, and our mission, as you can see here, is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. So definitely wanted to start with that. And just jump into this science of learning and development. So the big thing about the science of learning and development is that it brings together multiple disciplines to inform this evidence base around how young people learn and develop. And you can see that the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, which we call the SOLD Alliance for short, combines diverse areas of research. So it's these organizations that have come together. The 6 on the screen, you can see AIR is part of the Alliance. And really the purpose of the Alliance is to ensure that this science, the findings that we're getting from all of these different disciplines, is translated into policy and practice. So making sure it's not just sitting on a shelf, collecting dust. We're really trying to translate it into usable ways for the field to really use all of the amazing things that we're finding. So these are, I mentioned there are multiple disciplines. So you can look at the screen. I won't show this for too long, but just to see, these are the disciplines that we're thinking about. And so when you take a look at them, probably they resonate with you. Maybe you studied some of these things, but the thing I want to point out here is that none of this is really new. It was the act of bringing all of this information together to form a more comprehensive understanding of how young people learn and develop and ultimately thrive. That was the thing that the SOLD Alliance and the papers around the science of learning and development really did. So all of this is coming together from these different disciplines. None of it's new, with one exception. So the neuroscience. We do have a better understanding now of how young people's brains are developing. And I think the really important thing to point out here is that the adolescent brain is still very malleable. So this is the second greatest developmental period in a child's life, and it's second to toddlerhood. And I will tell you, as someone who has a toddler, that period of time, for those of you who have children and have had toddlers, is a huge explosion. And I think we all have traditionally recognized that. But now we're learning that the adolescent brain has another huge explosion of development. And so it's something really important for us to think about as we're designing after-school programs. I'm sure Erin will talk about in designing summer learning opportunities, and then also in the school day, things that we need to take into account. So quickly, what are the findings from the science? I'm going to basically distill down a huge paper that is really interesting and packed full of information into a couple minutes. So I'm going to go quickly, but happy to talk more about this if people are interested afterward. So the first one is that all young people have the potential to learn and thrive, okay? Basic, straightforward, but really important. So there's no one who comes into the world like, oh, yep, you're a lost cause. You do not have the ability to learn and thrive. Everyone has the potential to learn and thrive. I mentioned the malleability. So there's great opportunity in adolescence to influence development. Our brains are so malleable and very resistant throughout life. You may hear the toddler I mentioned screaming in the background right now. So if you do, apologize for that. I can tune her out. Hopefully all of you can tune her out. So the important thing here with the malleability too is that our brains are changing. Adolescent brains are changing and they're resilient. So when an individual experiences trauma in their life, it does impact their learning because it impacts their brain chemistry. So we know this through this neuroscience. And if we look around the country right now, we can see lots of trauma happening. So we want to make sure that we're being responsive to that. The thing we know from the science of learning and development is that intentional developmental relationships, so the relationships piece, in identity-safe settings, the context, can buffer the effects of trauma on the brain. So when we're providing those strong relationships in a context that is safe, feels safe emotionally, physically, we're buffering the effects of trauma on the brain. More of the findings, the development is individual and it's integrated. So what does this mean? So the integrated piece means that social and emotional development doesn't happen over here and then academics happen over here. This is all happening together. We are whole people And it makes sense to us as we're talking about it, right? That we wouldn't like go, I'm going to go do social emotional learning here. Now I'm going to go do math. Now I'm going to go do reading. Like, no, that's not really how we learn. It's all integrated because we are whole people. We are also individual people. So when we think about, and I'm going to refer back again to my toddler, and for anyone who has children, you know, when you have kids from 0 to 2, we talk a lot about like every young person develops at their own rate. Like if your baby is not doing this by this time, it's okay, they will. If your toddler is not doing this by this time, it's okay, they will. But then when we get up into the older ages, that narrative kind of stops. But it's still true. We're all progressing, learning at our own individual pace. And finally, the last finding I will share about the science of learning development is this meaning-making piece, which is critical for long-term learning and development. So if we all think as adults back on things that we've learned and we've grappled with that really resonated with our experience, those are the things that we're much more likely to retain over time. So I think back to when I was in high school, and which is getting like further and further away these days. But the things that I really stand out to me and stick with me are the times when I had some project-based learning, or the times when I really made connections with what was going on in my life. So those are the things that really stick with me, and that's what we need to focus on when we're working with these young people. So that was a really fast overview of the science of learning and development. Hopefully that all made sense. I'm happy to answer any questions, but quick grounding in the science.
Yeah.
Hopefully that checks that box.
Thanks for that great overview. And for folks that want to go deeper into that, we've put some links in the chat box to some of AIR's resources around that topic. So both Autumn and Austin mentioned earlier, one strategy that's being targeted as a way to re-engage students and help with unfinished learning is after-school programs. And we know that quality matters. Can you tell us a little bit about what the evidence base says about the characteristics of high-quality, comprehensive after-school programs?
Sure, yeah, happy to talk about this. And just to start, when I talk about quality, comprehensive after-school programs, I really start by making the distinction between activity level quality and organizational level quality. They are both important and they are both needed. And I'll be talking through some characteristics of what we know about quality programs, but you'll hear some that are very activity level and some that are more organizational level. And I can go into some of those differences if that is not clear. But first and foremost, this will be no surprise based on what we just talked about with the science of learning and development, but the context is one of the characteristics. So having a safe and supportive environment, somewhere that's physically, psychologically, emotionally safe, so young people can really connect with the program, with the staff in the program. That's going to help them open up to be able to develop the skills, the knowledge, whatever it is that the program is really teaching, that having that context where they can be open to that information is so important. The second characteristic are the relationships. So relationships among peers, relationships with adults, they are essential for building the trust and fostering a sense of belonging in the program. So if you think about these first two things, context and relationships, these are things that don't just happen, which brings me to the third characteristic, which are the adults. So we're looking for caring, well-trained workforce, which is essential to creating the supportive spaces that are identity safe, promote a sense of belonging, and are really tying all these pieces together. Another characteristic of quality programs are the partnerships. So this is part of that, the comprehensive piece. So I want to make sure that doesn't get lost as well. That's Austin had mentioned, showed the quotes on the screen, and it's a comprehensive after-school program. So having strong partnerships with families, with the community, with schools, this is important for having that integrated and cohesive program. One of the things that maybe seems a little obvious, but we do have research on to back up, is that attendance and engagement. So young people, particularly as we get to middle and high school, are more likely to attend, when they're interested in and engaged. So, you know, that makes sense. Obviously, there's a lot more autonomy as you get older, and you're going to come to things that are interested to you. So when they attend more, they benefit more. So this is why we really need to focus on having the comprehensive after-school program for young people, and that we're incorporating that youth voice into program planning and development. And so what does that look like really? So the coordinated and comprehensive program might mean tying together many different offerings. So you might have the tutoring or academic remediation, sports and recreation, specific content interests like STEM, arts, and all of this is tied together into a comprehensive program that's really serving the whole child. And then finally, the last characteristic of a quality program I wanted to touch on was just this infrastructure, organizational support management piece. So you can see there are all of these different pieces involved in this. And so it really does require an infrastructure to ensure that there are things like ongoing staff development, which is going to help attract and retain quality staff, that the program has set goals and determined metrics for assessing progress made towards those goals, because we really want the programs and the staff to be engaged in some sort of continuous improvement process. We should be expecting them to always be improving, always looking to see how they could be responsive to the changing needs in the community. We definitely saw that over the past year, being responsive to changing needs in the community, as we saw everywhere. But those are the high level characteristics I wanted to cover for today.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Last question for you. I know at AIR you studied a number of after-school programs, so I'd love for you to share some on-the-ground examples of these quality programs. And I do think that sometimes when people hear after-school programs, they only think of younger students. I know that there's many engaging older youth programs as well. So I was wondering what do these types of programs look like at the younger grades versus older youth?
Yeah, I appreciate this question, and also the focus on the various ages, because I think we do, you know, we often think of elementary school when we think of after school programs. So often, you know, in an elementary school, a quality after school program in an elementary school will capitalize on partnerships between the school, community-based organizations. They may have school day staff who stay after school and work in the after school program, sometimes on like tutoring and academics, but often in quality programs, you see teachers are able to pursue their own interests that are maybe outside of what they do during the school day, which then helps foster those relationships with the students maybe that they do have in the school day, but they have a special relationship because they're both able to focus on something that's really meaningful for them in the program. So I think the elementary piece is, you know, there are several different ways you can approach it and several different models out there. But the two specific examples I wanted to give are focused on older youth. One of them is in Chicago. It's called Afterschool Matters. And this is a program, provides after school and summer programming. So stepping on Aaron's toes just a little bit, but to nearly 19,000 teens in Chicago. And for anyone who has worked with teens, has a teen, has been a teen, you know that this can be a tough age group to engage. So it's really important though, because as we saw from the science of learning and development, this is a time when we really need to meaningfully engage adolescents, because it's such a huge developmental period in their lives, and they're going to grow and develop. So let's make sure we're helping them grow and develop in positive ways. And After School Matters, ASM really does that. And they do that through project-based opportunities that are led by industry experts. So they may have someone in arts or communications or sports or STEM who acts as a mentor for the teens. The teens do receive a stipend to participate in the program. This helps with some of the barriers that we can see, you know, as young people start to get older and they start to look to have jobs. So they do receive a stipend, and then they work toward producing a final product that they can showcase at an event. So something to really it's like a tangible thing that they can put out into the world. And so I think the things that ASM capitalizes on that we've talked about are so important are those relationships. They have the relationship with their mentors, providing opportunities for teams to really explore their interests and develop skills. It's really personal. They have a lot of youth voice, lots of youth voice in the program. So I love that as an example of something for older adolescents. But then also the age group that is so near and dear to my heart are middle school students. I love middle schoolers. I think it's such an amazing period of time. I haven't been a middle school teacher. I have worked with middle school students in an outdoor education environment, so maybe a little bit different view from what a middle school teacher would say, but they're so curious and are getting such a sense of autonomy. So there is a program called the After Op in Tulsa, Oklahoma that is run by the Opportunity Project, which is an intermediary in Tulsa. And during the pandemic, they were able to pivot, everyone's favorite word this past year. They pivoted and offered virtual programming, and it was really based on family input. So they reached out to families to figure out what it is the families need, and then they partnered with local organizations like the Tulsa Debate Club or the Debate League, and they were able to offer like small group clubs virtually for the young people in the program, and then also had time for program staff to continue meeting with young people via Zoom to ensure that they maintain those relationships. They could check in on the well-being of the young people. So you can see here too that the After Op focused on the importance of the relationships. They had the youth voice and the partnering with families in there. So just a little bit different maybe of the focus from what we think of when we think of a traditional elementary school program. It does get different. And After School Matters does actually have the word after school in its name, but you see even things as simple as, maybe not calling it a program. Maybe it's you focus on the offerings. Like the young people, we all as adults focus a lot on this program is called the 21st Century Program because the funding stream is from 21st Century Community Learning Centers. This is, another thing, but the young person doesn't care where the funding comes from. They just care what program they're going to. So thinking about it more from them in the center and how could we really engage them. So those are just a couple examples to share.
Great, thanks so much. And we have had the opportunity to take some legislators to After School Matters, both the after school setting and the summer learning programs when we've been in Chicago for meetings. So looking forward to the time when we can have in-person meetings again and take legislators and legislative staff to those programs. Thanks so much, Jamie. We're going to switch gears now. And we have Erin Dworkin with the National Summer Learning Association. Thanks for joining us, Erin. I know how busy you are with summer gearing up here.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Jamie, and thank you, NCSL, and to everyone who's joining us. Thank you for your leadership and your commitment to these issues. I'm Erin Dworkin. I am now the CEO of the National Summer Learning Association. Prior, I was actually the national president of a large national after-school organization called Afterschool All-Stars. That was a middle school focused program that served 90,000 low-income students around the country in 20 major markets in 13 states. So, so we ran after school, ran summer programs. So everything Jamie's been speaking about is near and dear to my heart and backs up all the important work that my organization and all our partners are doing on the ground. And I'll just also say this, you are catching us at the height of interest in the world of summer learning programs. There are more people care about summer learning this week than maybe in the history of time, and it's worthwhile and it's valuable, but it's become a very hectic time, and it's in part thanks to the investments that have been made, both at the state level and now at the federal level, which will come down to the states. So thank you, Austin, for your presentation as well. I'm going to go quickly through some information, and maybe Ashley and Autumn feel free to stop me and ask any questions, but I just want to kind of, do some level setting. So real fast, if you don't know our organization, NSLA, we refer to it as, been around for more than 25 years, actually did a lot of the original research on summer learning loss. So if you know that phrase, that comes out of NSLA. And basically, you know, our mission has always been to combat summer learning loss and close the achievement and opportunity gaps, which research shows grow. They always exist, but they grow most dramatically between lower income and higher income students over the summer. We've talked about why that is and how to resolve that. But our vision ultimately is to make sure that all children in America, but especially the most vulnerable, we define as the 29 million students who qualify for the free and reduced lunch program in this country between kindergarten and 12th grade, we're focused on them. And we want to make sure that every one of those students has access and can afford to participate in a high quality summer learning experience every year. And we can talk about how we do that. Next slide. So again, we are a big network. So I'm not a direct service provider anymore. So I have this kind of national purview, which is really interesting. And we represent more than 15,000 organizations, which started with school districts, but also all these other youth serving government agencies you have in your states. When you think about your library system, your parks and rec departments, public housing, and as students get older, summer youth employment. Plus, we work with and support all the world of nonprofit program providers, your Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, 4-H. And then when you also overnight summer experiences, which is unique to the summer because you have the time and flexibility to do that. So all the summer camps, Outward Bound, these college access programs people have, and we talked about summer youth employment. And then we are very focused on paid internships. And then as an association, we do what most associations do, which is we focus and lift up program quality. We focus on building partnerships, policy work, and then ultimately, you know, public awareness, and then investing in the people who make all these programs happen. Next slide. So I just want to make a couple quick points about why specifically summer is helpful and a high ROI time. And let me just say, and the title of this slide is kind of how we think about it. So we talk about summer, but really what we're talking about is inequity and opportunity. That's what summer is. That's what summer learning, that's why it matters. And so research bears this out, but we believe and we say summer is the most unequal time in all of education. We do fund public education in this country between September and June for the most part. And then in the summer, it is completely uneven. We're making more investments, but it is not a guarantee. And so what do we know? We know that families with resources provide, and without blinking or thinking, spend thousands of dollars on amazing learning experiences for their children. And then low-income families who can't afford that don't have that, and they fall behind. But that's the inequity. The other piece is the opportunity. You're a little bit outside, you're connected to the school system, but you have chances to do all these other learning experiences in the hands-on way, in the project-based ways Jamie was talking about, that could be amazing experiences. So when we talk about that, what we know about summer is what we call our 4 eyes of summer. It's this great time to improve whatever you're working on. That's why we're talking about it as a recovery strategy right now. So, and also as a bridge to getting ready for the next school year, as we hope everyone will be able to be back in person together. So an amazing time to improve, but not just for students, it's also for adults. So as legislators, it's a high ROI time. It's more professional development and training for teachers happens in the summer than any other time. But we don't have enough money and time to go around. So your best summer learning program doubles up as a staff training. And we could talk about what that looks like, but the best programs do that. And Breakthrough, Collaborative, and Generation Teach. These are all summer programs for middle school low-income kids. They also tell you that they are diverse teacher pipeline recruitment and retention programs. So again, if we just brought in our sense of what's possible, it's also a time for innovation. We just launched a new summer innovation fellowship for educators of color. We only had 2 spots. We had hundreds of applicants in 3 weeks. And so if you have a new idea that you want to test out and try out that you think could be helpful, that you want to do with young people, try it out over the summer first before you scale it your school-wide and district-wide. And that's what we see. And there's so many summer programs, there's so many national organizations, statewide organizations, entire schools that started out as summer learning programs. So if you're entrepreneurial in education, we find a lot of folks drawn to the summer. It's also this time for integration. I think that when we talk about integration, we're talking about breaking down the artificial silos in education. And Jamie sees this, and all of you have probably seen it. And we're very good at organizing ourselves and having, everyone who works during the school day from 9 to 3 get together, and then everyone who works in the after school from 3 to 6, and then people who work in the summer months get together. So, and they're all having the same conferences on the different conferences on the same topics, usually to talk about how to serve the exact same kids. So the question is, when everybody really wants to work together, but no one has time, and once the school year starts, the train has left the station. So summer, in a real way, gives everyone a chance to partner and model those partnerships. And if we do a good job, and if we're intentional, then those partnerships carry into the school year. So that's another thing that we're focused on. People have a chance to bring the school district with the nonprofit, with the library, with the government agency and the corporate, and get them all to practice what that partnership looks like. And then this final piece is, again, all building on what Jamie was describing, is what we call is a time for impact. And not just from the reasons of the brain research, but for certain, but that a summer learning experience does feel a little bit different from school. That's why we don't always refer to it as summer school. Of course, we work with summer school programs, but you could be certified teachers can be teaching in lots of places. I could give you lots of examples of different models of programs where academic learning is happening in different creative ways. And so that kind of learning is both immediate and it's lasting. Is why Jamie can say decades later, I remember this experience. That's what we're going after here. By definition, summer is a time of life transition. And especially if you're in that summer between your elementary school and your middle school year, or between middle school and high school. So if you're in that time transition, and the brain research will back this up, now you're vulnerable. But if you're vulnerable, it means you're open, and you're open to learning. And so if you want to talk to a kid about not dropping out of high school, you don't want to wait till 10th grade. You want to talk to them in that summer before 9th grade about what that looks like. And so now it's just high ROI time. The last thing at the macro system level is that this issue of summer learning and loss and trying to make sure that all young people have access to these programs, it is an actual solvable issue. And we know what good programs look like. We know where the programs are. We know where the students are. We have even now some funding. It's like, this is one of those issues that's not intractable. And so when I talk about impact, I think if this is something that we could actually collectively cross off America's to-do list. So that's a lot there, but we'll just, that's how we think of it. If you want to go to the next slides, I'll just share. So there's a lot of research on summer learning loss, but what's happened now is that it's morphed into COVID learning loss. And so initially, if you remember a year ago when COVID first hit, everyone thought in America we were only going to be out of school for 3 months. And so then everyone came to NSLA because they wanted to see what's the research on what happens to students when they don't have school for 3 months and what happens. But now it's been a year. And so now there's all this research to show what the negative effects. And we, by the way, we should acknowledge the heroic efforts of our teachers and our schools and our school systems that have been teaching. So it's not been nothing. And I don't want to be dismissive of it, but it hasn't been optimal. And so again, we have the chance to use the summer to respond. You go to the next slide. And so, but now we know about COVID, and we know COVID is real and it's traumatic, and it's not been equally impacting every community the same. And if you go to the next slide, and so, you know, we know, and there's more research, so you don't need to hear it from me, but when you think about all the people who've had to lose their jobs, if you were in a low income bracket, or, you know, communities of color have lost their jobs much more than most during COVID. Many more have gotten sick and actually died. More than 500,000 people have died, but so many more people of that number have been in communities of color. So there's real trauma going on. And that's why these programs need to respond, not just with the academic supports, but with the social emotional learning too. So I'm not going to, I'll quickly just go through these. I'm not going to mention all of them, but if you go to the next slides. So this is just when we're talking about inequality, and these are slides that Harvard Professor Jimmy Kim did during a presentation he just gave and allowed us to use. But we just see, obviously, who was able to respond during COVID in this, you know, who had some more resources to help students learn during this time. And if you were low income, and again, more disproportionately, communities of color were struggling harder. Next slide. Sorry, keep going. You don't need to click on all these, sorry, yeah. Also on the physical health, sports have been canceled. You haven't been allowed to go to parks. A lot of folks haven't been allowed to be inside and congregating. So there's health. Remember, we were so concerned about student obesity, childhood obesity. I mean, these issues still matter. And if everybody's been watching YouTube videos and not getting out and getting around, and what we know is that physical activity helps you academically too. So these programs, when we design them, need to make sure that they're responding to physical activity. And so there's a lot, again, unfortunately, lower income, communities of color, disproportionately affected around health and physical issues as well. Next slide. Sorry. Sorry, next slide. And then about the mental health, and this is just kind of underscores the challenges. And this is an interesting stat about how much more time, the more low income you are, the more time you've been spending in front of a screen. And because again, maybe your family doesn't have the resources to get you involved in other activities. And so look at this, now in 2020, hours a day that students are just, you know, online and doing these different activities, and the more income your family has, the less you're doing that because you have other positive experiences. So all this adds to where we are. Next slide. Sorry. So what's exciting, if you keep going here, is that our field, the out of school time field, so summer and after school combined, have been built for the moment we're in. There has been a lot of research from our friends at the Wallace Foundation, from RAND Corporation, looking at what works, what makes for a high quality summer learning program. Actually, they identified 43 programs that meet the highest level of effectiveness, 43 different program models that people can learn from and that are school-based and whatnot. So we know how to run these good programs. We have the research to show what they look like, and everybody wants to be helpful right now. Next slide. So this is the reports. And again, you can see here, when we talk about these 43 programs, they're not all the same. 20 are academic focused, but 12 are SEL, some are home-based, some are more career skill-based. So again, we have a lot of great examples. We give out national awards. We're always lifting up great examples of programs, and a lot of them are in your state. So we're just trying to make sure people don't reinvent the wheel, people don't feel alone in this moment. And the funding, by the way, I know we have a big focus on this coming summer, but the funding, as Austin was describing, doesn't have to be spent all the summer. It's funding that can be spent until 2023, in some cases 2024. So the question is, how do we not make summer and after school programs an afterthought, but build it into our year-round planning and be intentional? Some of the money has to be obligated, but it doesn't have to be spent. And so we have a chance to kind of really leverage these times. Next quick slides, I'll go through. Sorry, you can jump through all those. And this is a recap again. I don't want to, Austin did a great job, better job than me. It is very complicated, but just to reiterate how much more funding is coming down to states and to the local education agencies. The 21st century funding that Jamie was referencing nationally is about $1.2 billion a year. We now have triple that coming this year. There's more that's available, but just as the 1% set asides, the 1.2 billion just for summer and the 1.2 billion for after school program. So this investment is a historic and gives us a lot of opportunity to be thoughtful. And as you all leaders, we want to be good stewards of these dollars. Next slide. And again, so we work at the systems level, state level, and city level. We bring stakeholders together to assess their landscape and what do they need and what the hurdles are. And we do reports and we have recommendations, and we do this in lots of states and communities. And then we work at the program level. Next slide. And we actually have a network of school districts called New Vision for Summer Schools, where we work with more than 50 school districts around the country, thinking through how do we reimagine what summer school looks like. So it's not a punishment, so it's not remedial, so it's not just mandatory for some, but it's something that everybody wants to go to, and it's hands-on and all the things that Jamie describes. And finally, next couple slides, it's just we have lots of resources, and again, some are ours, but also we have this huge network of partners. So we're just always sharing resources. We've been putting out a lot during COVID, this playbook, but our major guidebook that we share with folks, it literally is called Summer Starts in September. Here we are in March, and a lot of folks or April 1st, actually. So everybody's trying to get together, but a best practice is that people are thinking about how do we maximize this time earlier on, and we will have that going forward in years to come. Next slide. Again, there's lots of great resources, and we can help direct anybody who's interested after this, and my team. But one thing I'd like to lift up is this in the middle here, the Shaping Summertime Experiences. This group called the National Academy of Sciences, very prestigious group, had a 2-year commission looking at best practices around summertime programs and summer learning experiences. And Deb Maroney, Jamie's colleague, was on the commission. And it's a great report, has a lot of great information and recommendations. Unfortunately, came out right before COVID, so not as many people knew about it or learned about it, but I want to just keep lifting it up. It's a great resource for all of you. And next slide. And then just, we, again, are an ongoing resource to all of you and any of your partners with training and conferences and lifting up best practices. So again, this is a great opportunity we have to help millions of young people, and we will do anything we can to support you in doing that. So thank you for letting me go through all that, but I'll answer any questions, Ashley, you want to.
Great. I want to thank you so much, Aaron. I want to give folks the opportunity to ask questions either of Jamie or of Aaron. You can just take yourself off mute and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat box, either way. And I'll be happy to get things started here while you guys think of your questions. You know, we talked about this earlier in the week about the fact that there was a lot of students nationwide that didn't log in for virtual learning over the past year. So I was wondering if either of you could comment on how my community organizations and schools work together to identify these students and re-engage them and re-engage their families.
Jamie, do you want to go first, or?
Go for it, and then I'll add on.
Yeah, look, I think this is where, you know, the community as a village plays a role here, because they're students, and there could be lots of reasons they haven't logged on. You know, we think about the digital divide. You know, they were asking initially, do you have a computer in your home? They didn't ask, do you have 3 computers in your home? You might have a computer in your home, but your mother needs that computer to do her job. How is she going to like? There's just so much that were unintended kind of challenges and consequences that we hadn't thought about. But what's interesting is how many community partners may know those students. So maybe the district. This is where this is going to take all of us. And I think at the state level and the local level, the people who are going to be the winners in this moment are the people who could actually braid resources and connections. And so there are, maybe the district wasn't successful in getting students to log on, but there's another community organization that knows that same student and knows where they are and knows how to get to them. And so the question is who's kind of crosswalking, who knows who, and who can help them. The other thing that we talk about in terms of attendance and getting people to care, and again, you can't just like throw something online and expect people to show up. Like, just, you know, if you're disengaging in person or disengaging online, it's still disengaging. People don't want to come. So how do you do that? And youth voice, you know, students are much more tech savvy than all of us. So they know how to make a better online experience than any of us could create or design. So why don't you ask them? As when people are asking me, how do we make a good summer program? It's like, first of all, talk to the students right now. Create your youth advisory board and have them have a say. And if they have a say and they have a sense of ownership in your program, well, let them recruit their peers to come. Who's better at getting students to show up? Like the teacher that's going to like try and track them down, or your buddy who's saying, come on, we have this project to do. We're going to do it together. It's going to be awesome. You know, so we have to kind of empower students to be our partners in their own learning experiences. Ultimately, in education, it's about empowering students to take ownership for their own learning. So not just dragging them kicking and screaming into these experiences. So I would just highlight that. So using the partnerships, empowering student voice, and then, you know, there's a lot more we could talk about. Jamie?
Yeah, I echo all of that. I think that's, you know, I'd use the example of the middle school program in Tulsa, you know, connecting with families and young people during the pandemic. And that's the case for a lot of these community-based organizations, that they do focus so much on relationships, and they might have relationships with young people that the school districts don't have. And then just one specific example of this that I think is just such a good idea is that the National Urban League has launched an effort where they're pairing one young person who continued to engage throughout the pandemic with another who became disconnected, and they're having the young people interview each other, and then they'll decide ultimately what is the best format to report out on that. So that's still kind of in the works, but I think to Aaron's point, like, get the young people involved because they know each other is such a good approach too. And just hearing that the National Urban League was doing that in a intentional and kind of more formal process, I think makes a lot of sense.
And thank you, Jamie. It's a great example. And I would also just like to echo how many high school students have community service hours that they are required to do to graduate and could be utilized in this way. because they're role models, and you know, elementary and middle school student look up to them, and they could be someone, and then now you're paying them, you might be able to pay them as part of their summer job. I mean, there are different ways you can engage them to help promote attendance and finding students connected.
Great, thank you. I love that. I've not heard about that pairing of students, that Mentor model. That's really great. I'm going to give the opportunity for folks from the audience to ask any questions they might have. I have one last question before we close here. You know, just kind of putting these pieces together for legislators and legislative staff. So what are some of the, you know, takeaways that you think state legislators might have around their role in re-engaging students through after school and summer learning programs, and the ideas that you guys have?
You know, I think if you're a state legislator, what you understand, in my opinion, better than anyone else in your state, are all the assets and resources your state has, and the multi-sector resources that your state has. And that's what this moment requires. And we need these connectors. And so, you know, we have entire library systems that were filled with books that no one was allowed to go to those libraries. And yes, we're all worried about it. And all these librarians who weren't asked, and who want to be aligned. They are like, ask us what you need. And so this is a moment for everyone to go above and beyond and to break down silos. And as a state legislator, I would encourage you to take the lead in pushing people to go a little bit outside their comfort zone. So what does that mean? If you're an arts program, that's great, but we need you this summer and the coming summers to do an hour of academics. And it might be math, and it might be literacy. And maybe that's not what you're used to, and we're gonna find you the staff and the training and the curriculum to do it. And if you were an academic only program, you can't only be academics. We need you to do some social emotional learning and physical activity. And if you're, and so the person who could help make those connections, I think is a state legislator in their district, and knowing how to bring players together to even plan. So I think this is a huge opportunity where we really need local leadership. Because again, and you know, it's complicated with the dollars, but corporations want to help. You know how many corporations last summer created curriculum for kids? I don't know, or Apple Computer was calling me, say, we have coding curriculum. Like everybody was jumping in to help here. And we need some people to be traffic up and not say no, but to help bring it together. And our poor districts in that, when I say poor, meaning overwhelmed, it's very hard to be a school district where everyone's calling you and saying, I want to help you, and you're not sure. You don't even have time. You're trying to think about getting through spring break. You know, people want to talk about summer and after school and all these things. So they need some help. And one thing I'll just also mention here is this idea of our teaching staff being really tired right now. And again, they deserve to be. But what that means is there might be money to hire for lots of programs, and there might be a lot of teachers who don't want to work, even if you can pay them. And so there's going to be we need some leadership on the ground who are going to say, all right, we need to find some creative solutions here, and bringing the nonprofit and the government and the business, all these entities together, because unfortunately they don't connect enough, and there's a chance to kind of weave it more seamlessly.
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. I have been putting a lot of resources from AIR as well as NSLA in the chat box along with Autumn, and we've also just dropped NCSL's web pages. We have a number of resources there, but I also, as we close, I want to mention, for those of you that want to go a little bit deeper, we have a boot camp on after school and summer learning. It's going to be a 90-minute session next Friday, the 9th, from 2 to 3:30 Eastern time, and you should be receiving an email with the Zoom registration information. But as we close here, a big thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.